Hello. Hello. Welcome to the latest episode of the Red Pill Fiction Factory. My guest today is known only by his first two initials and a surname, which I don't even know if it's an accurate surname. It's TR Hudson. I can't find any biographies on him on the internet. I only know that he's from North America and that he's written a novel called Automaton, as well as several short stories, which we'll be coming on to later. Hi, TR. Is that what I call you?
TR is fine. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on. Thank you. You and I go back a bit further than most of my guests. I read some of your early work as a sort of beta reader, I think they call it, and got hooked. And now you've recently come out with your first novel. But before we get on to all of that, can you tell us a bit about you and where you come from, or to within the parameters you feel comfortable with, obviously, but as much as you like about yourself?
Sure. My name is TR Hudson. I'm a writer, and let's keep it at that. I'll maintain an air of mystery, and it'll help build my mystique.
Oh, God.
I am American, and I've been writing on and off for a couple of years now. The book that I wrote, Automaton, took about 3 to 4 years to actually finish up. And yeah, and don't sell yourself short, Richard. You were my first mutual on Twitter, and you're also the first person that I showed my short story, John Henry, to. So I really do appreciate your friendship and the help that you gave me early on in my short Twitter career.
Well, I greatly appreciate that. Thanks. I enjoyed playing that role. You're going to have to develop your theme somewhat about your personal life. You obviously are quite red pilled from your Twitter feed, from the books. Where did that come from? What's the background there? Were you born this way, so to speak, or was it something that you had an epiphany on the road to?
Well, so I'm a child of the internet.
Right.
So I remember in high school, a friend of mine, he just loved going on 4chan. He just always was talking about it. And then suddenly I'm on there, and it went all downhill from there. Any chance of me being a normie was out the door.
Tell us about 4chan. I am familiar roughly with it, but a lot of people won't be.
Yeah, so I mean, well, anybody in our circles knows what 4chan is. It is an image board online that hosts. I would say it's the last bastion of the Wild West feeling of the internet. It's very much, you can, within reason, you can't post certain illicit activities, but for the most part, you can post pretty much anything you want on the various boards. It really depends on which one you're on. So the politically incorrect board lives up to its name. Anything from the modern happenings going on right now to, let's say, the most far right of the far right activities that you could think of, and I'll leave it at that. The history board, I like to peruse from time to time. They have some pretty good discussion on history, which is a favorite topic of mine, as well as the literature board. They're a bunch of snobs who've never read anything, but they act as if they do. So, I fit in well there.
It comes across, I've never really been on it, but what little I've seen is it comes across very chaotic. Is it user friendly? Can anyone just, you say that we're all familiar with it, and we are kind of, a lot of us never sort of dived into it head first. Can anyone just slide in and get something out of it, or is it?
Well, so it's completely anonymous, so there's no signing in.
Too sophisticated for us.
I would say it's very easy to use, but there is a steep learning curve when it comes to etiquette and lingo, and there's the common refrain that you need to lurk more, which means you need to just not say anything in the threads, just read and kind of indoctrinate yourself into the Chan culture.
Okay. Do you come up against opposition? The controversies within it, or conflicts? Or is it more everyone's on our side and you can just breathe out?
It's more internet blood sports, so anonymous people shouting at each other, and a lot of the time, like I don't really interact that much. I just kind of lurk and laugh at the memes, and sometimes there's some pretty good threads of real life happenings. But otherwise,
I will say this:
my Lord Miles,
Yep.
the king of Kabul,
Yes.
he started his whole adventure by posting on 4chan, so that's that kind of thing.
Okay. I will say this: some of the hottest takes on Twitter, nearly every time I'm absolutely blown by a tweet, is it's an extract from one of the chants. It's just like a cut and paste with that pink background or whatever it is, and I guess because it's anonymous and because there's no censorship, they can say a lot of the things they couldn't say elsewhere. So I appreciate its existence, although I haven't really gone there myself. So you sort of slid, when you say you went into this Chan world early on, you never really, that was your political education, really. You never knew otherwise, in a way. Is that right?
Well, I mean, like I tried to keep up with, newspapers and stuff. I thought of myself as a precocious young man, sorry. And I thought, oh, I'm one of those smart kids who reads the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and I have opinions and blah, blah, blah. It's all bullshit. And yeah, so around 2016, I'd kind of fallen out of 4chan a little bit, but then Donald Trump said he was running for president, and that was a paradigm shifting moment. I'd say that if my early introduction to 4chan was an appetizer, then the election of Donald Trump was my main course red pill, let's say. And then he carried this momentum with him that none of the other candidates possessed. And when he won, nothing happened, more or less. We got whinging and crying from the mainstream media, but he didn't do anything. And that led me to discovering Mencius Moldbug and elite theory and the idea of like this cathedral that generates the consensus that runs our society. And I'd say that was my most recent red pill. That was maybe a year or two ago, around the time of the 2020 election.
This is known as bio-Leninism. I think it's right in saying, and it's a fascinating topic, yes. And once you get your head at it, pretty much explains everything that's so confusing.
Yeah, bio-Leninism is a pretty interesting idea
by
a poster named Spandrel, which basically takes the losers of societies, the rejects, the outcasts, and has made them more or less into the overclass, the administrative state. And I mean that's really the best way that you could kind of see what's going on in the US today. I think Spandrel's essay, I'm not sure if he's done much else after that, but he's definitely added to the right-wing canon with that essay.
Yep. I've been in touch with him actually on the internet, on emails, and he hasn't really done much. He does run a blog still, I think, but that was his seminal or his main contribution to the whole thing. And bio-Leninism, I'll throw in, is very central to my understanding of the world as I depicted in my novel. I see the world as run purely on those, or the Western world anyway, is run purely on those lines. So I'm taking it you're not a trust fund kid, so you 4chan was a sideline. You did your schooling, and at some point you decided to try writing. How did the two? Where did that come into your equation?
So I went to college and I took a creative writing course. I fell in love with it. I ended up getting a degree in liberal art, one of the many humanities. I won't go into that, but writing became an obsession. That and literature. I fell in love with the Western canon, especially the work of Harold Bloom, who passed sometime a couple of years back. But the way that he described literature, I'd never heard anybody describing anything like that before. And I started to understand. I started reading these really old books because I could get away with not doing that in college because the modern university system is a joke. And yeah, that's my goal from the beginning from writing. I said I am going to shoot for the stars, and hopefully one day I will be canonized. I don't care if I make a shitload of money or not, but they're going to be teaching a class about one of my books some days.
Outstanding.
And,
Great.
We'll see about that.
Bloom, of course, for anyone who's not familiar, was very critical of the way the American university system, humanities around the world were going. His great work is all about that, and it's great that it inspired you, because I'm sure that's what he would have wanted. So you'd left university, you'd started writing, you were working, I presume, to earn your keep. Is that right?
Yeah, I have a 9 to 5 that I don't really have much passion for, but it keeps the lights on.
Needs must, yeah. And tell us about your early forays into writing. Was John Henry the first of your short stories that you put out?
Yes, I actually wrote that in college.
Right.
I had it on ice for a while, so it was just sitting on my hard drive. And it's funny, I was listening to a podcast with Zero HP Lovecraft, who is, I'd say the preeminent right-wing online writer right now. And he was talking about how Murakami, the Japanese writer, was sitting at a baseball game one day and said, oh, I could write a novel, and that inspired him, Zero
Right.
HP Lovecraft, to start writing.
Okay.
And that in turn inspired me. Oh, I could put stuff on a blog. So it's this chain of, and I'm sure he's inspired, if not 100, then close to 100 writers. Well, about 400 given the amount of Passage Prize entries that he had to judge. So I'm sure my story in that regard is not very very new and interesting.
I hope to have a Passage Prize winner on shortly.
Well, I was shortlisted, so there you go.
Oh,
Yeah,
very good.
yeah, top 27.
With what?
So nothing you've read. It was a completely brand new work.
Yeah, it had to be, didn't it?
Yep. And that'll be coming out probably, I think, this summer.
Well, terrific. Well done. You publish via Kindle your novel, but on Substack you have a very active blog. And one of the things that struck me is you're very prolific, especially by my standards. You just pushed out a story on the war in Ukraine, for example, which by definition means you wrote it more or less in a week or two.
Yeah, I wrote that in a couple of days. That was fun. I forget what inspired. I think I was watching a podcast or one of those one of the weekly YouTube shows, and they were talking about the Reddit battalion, and
Right.
I checked out that subreddit, and there's anything from demoralization attempts to just pure delusion on that subreddit. well, I mean, all of Reddit is just illusion, but um, yeah, it was fun to write um, a new mail, like one of these like kind of soy infused bugman types going off to fight in a war, having no understanding of what that is. And as soon as the going gets tough, he tucks down, goes home,
Yep. A
And
lot of them, it's going to be a great sub story to this whole episode. A lot of them had all their illusions removed in a millisecond when their bases were
right.
struck. And it turns
And
out they were struck because their telephones were on and telling the Russians where they were from, which country. So they could just spot all these British numbers and American numbers in one little congregation. So a few seconds later, the whole place gets blown to smithereens. And that's been done several times. Now they're posting these things on Reddit, I believe, these videos
yeah,
that tell the Russians everything.
yep. No, they're not doing OPSEC very well.
Now you're not a soldier. You don't have military experience then, because that was a question I had in the back of my mind.
I was a soldier, yes.
Oh, you just seem somehow missed that out in your.
I don't like to advertise. I mean, like, half of right wing Twitter, I feel, has had some sort of military service. At least a lot of the guys that I kind of interact with. But yeah, I was a soldier for 4 years,
Okay.
and that definitely informed some of my opinions. There's some really far right guys in the army. Uh, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, it comes across in the writing because either you've done a hell of a lot of research and got a great imagination, or you've been there, and it turns out you've been there.
Little bit of both.
A little bit
A
of both.
lot of research went into this book.
Um, Before moving on, the avatar that you use, this is consistent with the one you use in Twitter. I recognize from some memes that have been going around, it's a close-up of someone's face. It turns out, you tell me it was a Russian anti-drink driving campaign advert. But what people aren't seeing is he's holding his hand out in front of him, as though to tell people to stop. And it's been used a lot every time some weird lefty moronic trope comes out, he's wheeled out with a different set of words telling you to stop, please stop.
Right. Well, it's not even a drunk driving message. It's just stop drinking in general. So
Oh,
this is how delusional the Soviets were. They thought they could get the Russians to stop drinking vodka.
right. It's probably just as well they didn't, given the way the world's going. We need them to be. The soy boyness didn't get to beyond the Iron Curtain, thank God. In your writing, then, the style and influences that it might have you might have drawn on. Were there any?
Right. Yeah.
Or did
I
it
would.
just
So
evolve?
it's hard for me to describe my own style. I like to use as simple language as possible because I come from working class background, and I feel like anything that I put out should be accessible to anybody. That doesn't mean that it's simple or lacks depth. I think I mean some of my pieces are silly and aren't about as deep as a kiddie pool, but I think there's nuance and depth in some of the work that I put out. But it's funny because my biggest literary influence is Cormac McCarthy,
That comes
uh,
across.
who is coming from like the Southern Gothic style, the William Faulkner, the heir to William Faulkner, I guess. Um, so I'm inspired by McCarthy and then Hemingway, uh, which is funny because Faulkner and Hemingway disliked each other, and
Is that
they oh yeah, I mean there was this famous disagreement that they had. Faulkner talking about how Hemingway uses simple words, and he's like, oh, you don't even need a dictionary to read a Hemingway piece, and
okay?
Hemingway shoots back at him, well, big words don't carry big emotion, and pretty, yeah, I'd say they were famous rivals. in the American 20th century literature.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, it's funny. There is a YouTube podcaster, commentator named The Prudentialist. He does a weekly Sunday stream on geopolitics, but he also does a podcast here and there. And he did one recently on the game Fallout New Vegas, which is one of my favorite video games ever. And listening back, there's a lot lifted from Fallout New Vegas in my book.
From a video game?
Yeah. I mean, it's very.
How strange.
Yeah, it's a very well written game. The morals or the morality tracks that you can take in that video game are far superior to anything else that I've ever come across in that medium. And yeah, that's one of those games that's going to stick around for a long time. It's 10, 11 years old, maybe even 12 at this point. But it's so the graphics aren't as great, but it's better than anything getting put out these days. Highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't played it yet.
Okay.
And to
well, that's the first.
And to anybody who has played it, buy my book. And it's not just like it, but there you'll recognize some points and tropes and philosophy.
That's the first time I've ever heard of a video game influencing a writer, but there you are.
Well, I'm a younger guy, so
yeah, definitely. All right, that brings us on to the novel Automaton. America has fallen, her states divided into haves and have-nots. The East, a shell of its former glory, ravaged by a terrorist attack that has left them in darkness and now led by deluge worldwide, the largest corporation on earth. The West, a functioning society built on progressive values and looking to export their ideals back east. That's the setting, that's the context. And the hero who features throughout the novel is Mike Connors. I'm going to give a brief. There's a profile of him given in the book, which I'm going to lift. Michael Connors is in possession of a unique psychological profile coupled with an advanced level of skill in both the arenas of combat as well as the tracking of human movement and patterns. It is this combination that makes him a rare specimen. His combat tours in Persia resulted in a permanent activated state, alleviating him from the emotional weight that comes from prolonged exposure to combat stress, thus creating what psychologists refer to as Miles' Automaton, the machine soldier, or Miles, is it Miles maybe? Yeah, Automaton, the machine soldier. Give us, tell us about Michael, your inspiration for him, and then we'll come on to how his role in the book.
Yeah, well, it's funny. So you read my John Henry story.
Yeah.
And that story was based on my father, who was a truck driver on the East Coast of the United States. And, Michael Connors, because this was originally going to be one giant work, right? So it was going to be the story of my father's character, then myself, who I turned into Michael Connors, and then a few other characters that will be featured in the 2 follow-on novels to this.
Okay.
So getting out of the service, I had kind of a tough time, and I started wondering, what would be the government solution to post-traumatic stress? Well, they would just, put an implant in you and turn off your emotions, and you could turn it on and off. And then I thought, well, this is the government doing that. So how does that go wrong, and what does that look like? And that was the birth of Michael Connors.
Gotcha.
He is the well-wishing or the well-intentioned byproduct of incompetence, I would say, and kind of like a Frankenstein's monster. I refer to him as several times in the book.
That's a quite a nice new way to address the old character that features in many a film from the first days of novels onwards, really. He's war-torn, battered, somehow able to handle all this. Of course, in real life, it's not always quite so clear-cut. But I like the way you've presented this old theme in a new package. So he starts, it's a great opening. He's just on a routine sort of patrol almost. Water is very scarce in this new world, and it's dealt like as though it was a drug today. But again, that's where I was very aware early on that you'd seen some sort of military service, because every detail was just right. But then he gets, after the sort of minor scene at the beginning, he gets picked up by the head of Deluge Worldwide, a sort of slightly sinister character, draws him into his web. Would you like to develop that part of the book and how it develops the plot?
Right. So Alex Mercer is the CEO of Deluge. His building is probably the tallest building on Earth at this point. It's a lighthouse, a beacon of light in the otherwise dark East Coast United States, and he kind of sees himself as the next rightful ruler. He is recruiting armies, he's bringing civilization back, he's turning the lights back on in people's homes, and all that he asks is that people follow him. And those who don't get drafted into his armies anyway. He's used to getting his way, and when Michael decides that he doesn't want to, go on this mission, which he considers a suicide mission, he's convinced to do so by way of his mother being held hostage. And there's an interesting relationship he has with his mother. I think it's probably my favorite part of the book, because you have this old woman who is very sick. She's stuck in her habits that are making her that way. And every day she's looking at a corpse with her son's face on it. He's no longer the boy that she sent away to go to war. He's a monster in a lot of ways. So she learns to resent him. But, he resents her because, she kind of acts like a bitch towards him. He doesn't want to have to deal with it. He's got his own problems, but he still has this this deep down connection to her, that she's the last bit of humanity that he has left in him, the only connection, I'd say, to his humanity left. So he takes care of her. So when Mercer threatens her, he doesn't have a choice, which leads him on his journey to the West Coast.
I've got a passage I've picked out about it's a scene with the mother. It's obviously, I haven't used the term yet, but it's post-apocalyptic, the story. And I wanted to give a flavor of how you perceive the post-apocalyptic world, because obviously none of us have experienced it. And although there are several people addressing it in novels, they all have their own take. Anyway, this just gives a flavor. A few more hours passed, and Michael went to the kitchen making powdered eggs on hardtack. His mother, still asleep, couldn't eat the hardtack and always insisted on having bacon, knowing that he would never be able to get it. Instead, the new impossible Facon had just hit the store shelves. It tasted kind of like bacon, if bacon were rubbery, and tasted nothing like pork. The marketeurs who manufactured it must have banked on people forgetting what real bacon tasted like. Bacon, electricity, running water. These modern luxuries were once basic essentials. They'd gotten the lights back 3 years ago. He thought of a Deluge commercial where a child was interviewed and asked what the most amazing thing he'd ever seen was. He answered, "I came home one day and I flipped a switch and the lights came on." They picked the most pathetic-looking child they could find, one that would tug at the heartstrings. Deluge was the biggest company in the world, usurped the US government in exile, and still they needed PR, which I hope that gives not just the flavor of the post-apocalyptic world, but also the quality of your writing, which is outstanding.
Well, thank you.
There's a small, I was spoiled for choice for extracts, and I could have spent the whole interview just rereading your book to you. Here's another small one, but it's just a nice touch. The Gracie Pub, established in 1990, was by all accounts a shithole dive bar. None of the toilet stalls had doors, not even in the women's room. The beer was usually warm, and if there was food, it was always served cold. The bartender, who everyone just called Tim, had not one hair on his body and was missing an eye. Yeah, so there's a lot of humour in there. Michael reflects a lot on his world as he goes through the novel. So he's, without giving too much away, he's sent off on a mission across the sort of flyover country, what we call now, but in the post-apocalyptic world, no one's flying anyway. You have to go on foot or on horseback. Is that correct? It's no longer flyover country, but it is the big gap between the two coasts, let's say.
Right. I would describe it almost like in World War I, no man's land.
Yeah, but we're talking thousands of miles of it.
Yes, and the reason for that is drone technology had gotten to a state that, you know, you have thousands of these things in the air all the time, shooting at each other, shooting anything on the ground that is moving faster than a snail's pace. It's very much inspired by the Old West pioneers. I try and draw on that a lot. I did a fair bit of research into that and stuff like the Oregon Trail and the move out west. But
yeah, that's well reflected in the novel. It could almost be, and things haven't really changed that much in this post-apocalyptic world from how they would have been in the 1800s, minus the drones and a few other technological things. But it's obviously a very hard life. He encounters really all types of abhorrent, degrading behavior, disgusting behavior.
Right, and you know, it's almost a blessing for him to not have to feel anything going through these horrors. You know, he is the perfect subject to go do this because they know how terrible the world has become. That a sane, normal man would, you know, he would just die.
yeah, give up and or suicide. Here's a few more tastes of the world around you. Downtown was a disaster. Uptown abandoned. The business district burned to the ground. Neighbors turned on each other like rats escaping a sinking ship. There were two kinds of corpses: the ones that had lived long enough to starve to death, and the ones that died early, fighting for food, supplies, and anything else of value. Wow, I've got to say, there's some tough passages. It's not for the squeamish or the young.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a lovely young woman on Twitter who I'm mutuals with named Bones. I think Sheriff Bones. She changes it up from time to time, but she's been a big supporter of mine, and shout out to her. But she read my novel and she thought, well, I don't know why I thought there'd be a happy ending, or I don't like. Definitely something that she wasn't ready for and is not used to reading. So I think I did my job there. But if I scarred anyone, I don't apologize.
Well, you're dealing with tough topics, and this is the world we're in. And frankly, a lot of this, well, I hate to say it, but we're looking down the barrel of a very similar world at the moment. And the way things are going, I wouldn't be at all surprised if this is just documentary style. Having said all that, I found the ending very touching, for considering the content and what the ordeal that we, the reader, had been through, let alone the character. It was a very moving and yeah, in a way, a gentle ending for me. Now, you've already mentioned that this will be followed by one or two sequels, you say?
Yes. So the follow-on so this was originally going to be one giant work. So I've already got, 50,000 words of the sequel written.
Blimey.
It is going to be following Alex Mercer, the trillionaire business leader. And then the third book will follow the subject of the assassination, Sidney Posner, the scientist on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And I think that'll tie it all nicely together.
Trillionaires, scientists, are any of these based on real characters without getting us into deep water?
I would say that the Alex Mercer character is if Donald Trump were younger and also competent.
Okay, right. So, okay, that's interesting. And the scientist is just a scientist. Because
You'll have to
frankly,
read.
I'll have to read it. The headlines are just full of those types of people these days, aren't they?
I mean, I would say, so he's a computer scientist, so not,
right.
but very, very much of that mind of, he starts out as an atheist, and let's just say he questions some things throughout his life, as you'll find out in his book.
Okay, and at the rate you're writing, at 50,000 words, it can't be too long before you'll be presenting these for public consumption. What about your short stories? Tell us about them.
Yeah, I mean, so my short stories, I like doing more, honestly, because, well, for a few different reasons. Most of the time, they're passing thoughts that I have that I just have to get on paper. Otherwise, I'll never do anything with them.
Right.
They're not easier, but I can pay more attention to them. I can take more care to make them as close to my perfect vision as possible. And I get to put them on Substack, so there's no pressure. Like, I don't have to worry about is this making money? Is this popular? Blah blah blah. I can just put it out there, and then maybe in 100 years, somebody will say, "Hey, that's actually a pretty funny story."
I guess that's what short stories are really there for. In everything you just said, they should be almost whimsical, spur of the moment. They're a different beast to the novel in many ways, and well, I admire you being able to do it. I find that the novel writing takes so much out of me that I don't have the time or the energy for anything less than another novel.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've been dreading. I'm trying to find all these little projects I can do instead of write the sequel.
Right.
Just because it took so much out of me the first time. But yeah, I think probably I'll try to shoot for next year. We'll have a sequel, maybe 2 years.
And having a 9-to-5 job, does that make it? I mean, it seems it's not your passionate. You're not following a passionate career in your 9-to-5 by the sound of it. So does that give you a bit more room for maneuver when it comes to the writing process?
Yeah, I would say that. So I have a laptop job. I most of the time I'm just kind of looking at one eye at one screen, and then the other rest of the time I'm writing or reading some writing or trolling on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. And beyond the trilogy, plans for anything else, or is that too far ahead now?
Plans for anything else? So nothing novel length, I don't think. I have a few ideas. There is one short story I'm writing, a more pulp fiction type story that I'd be submitting to a publication called the Bizarchives. So we'll see if that comes out.
Okay. Tell us. Go on.
Oh, and then I announced on Twitter today I'm thinking about doing a lecture series on war and literature.
Yes, I saw that.
Which is going to be a huge undertaking, but I'm excited for it.
I added a novel that I
Yes, I did. I saw that. I'll have to pick it up.
Please do. I think it's the most underrated novel of the 20th century. I know that sounds, well, late 20th century anyway. Vietnam vet who basically anticipated where we're at now, that the war is the enemy isn't who we thought it was. And it's a terrific novel anyway. It's a great, war story. But it comes to some funny, weird conclusions in a way when it came out in the 80s. But I think it came out in about the 80s.
All very prescient.
But very prescient as to the current situation, and he was one of the few that I can point to that.
Oh, terrific! Yeah, I've got it on my wish list, and I'll probably pick it up soon here.
It's called Sympathy for the Devil for anyone who's watching. It's by Kent Anderson, who's a very retired. Modest, lives in Texas now, I think, rides horses. He's only written a couple of books. They're all terrific, very gritty, very masculine, and but Sympathy for the Devil, I think, is quite outstanding, and a war novel, a landmark war novel in my mind. Right, well, I was going to ask about the Passage Prize. Tell us about that. Now, most people won't know, but some mysterious backer gave a guy called Lomez something like $20,000 US. Is this correct?
So I know that. I don't know all the details of the Passage Prize. I wouldn't go and say that some mysterious backer gave it, though. That I believe it was done via collection. I know a lot of people pooled their money together in Bitcoin to fund the prize, and I think Lomez himself donated a good portion.
Okay.
I suppose he's independently wealthy, but I don't really. That's one of the cool things about Twitter, is that you don't really know these people. You know the important things, what they think, their senses of humor, and all the what kind of job do you do, how much money you make, stuff that normal people find important is totally irrelevant, which I appreciate.
Yeah. But he was all right. He was the coordinator, and the funds were raised. And the idea was to. This is terrific. It was to promote and discover new talent from the red pill side of the spectrum, or whatever description you want to use. That's correct as well, is it?
I would say that's a terrific summary. Yes. So there were 4 categories: fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and then visual art. And I believe I've heard rumblings that there'll be more categories in the next iteration. I submitted a story. I wrote it as soon as it was announced, and what the topic was. I had something done in like a couple days.
Wow.
I really tried my best. The thing about me is I just want people. I want it to be out there. I want it to exist, and that comes with it all manner of errors, spelling mistakes, word choice could be better. So I need to learn to take my time and let these things become better than they are. So the story that I wrote, I took 2-3 weeks to put out, which is a long time for me, and I think I was one of the first submitters to it. And
it had to be new fiction, didn't it? They wanted
yes, it had to be something brand new that, or at least something not published. So I believe the winner, a man by the name of VN Ebert on Twitter, EBERT, suggest a follow. I follow him, and I can't wait to see what else he's got out, because everything I've heard, his story, Georgia Buddha, is very good.
And it was judged. They had Mencius Moldbug man. I don't know if that's Mencius Moldbug himself.
So yes, Curtis. So Curtis Yarvin judged poetry. Zero H.P. Lovecraft judged fiction. Gio Pinichetti judged the visual arts, and then Benjamin Braddock.
Right.
He judged the nonfiction. So very.
Yeah.
These are pretty big names on our side of Twitter. So.
In our small pond, they're the big fish. Yeah, that's very impressive, and it certainly worked to promote the works involved and the whole field as a whole. So you should be grateful, and I guess that hopefully they will repeat it and, as you say, amplify it a bit and it'll become a more established.
Oh, definitely. I'm looking forward to this becoming a much bigger thing. And I mean, just there's so much energy around what we're doing right
Yes.
now. I've said it before, and I'll keep uh, hitting the drum on this. But the next great novel, like the next great American novel, Western novel, whatever you want to call it, is going to come from this sphere.
Yes.
This
Good.
is where all the creative energy is right now. You'll read something on like the New York Times bestseller list, and it's all the same. It's just
Fine.
it's
Oh,
grievance studies,
yeah.
paint by numbers kind of crap. I mean, some of it's okay. I don't mean to paint with that too broad a brush, but there's some good work coming out of the mainstream still, but not like this.
No, there's not. Well, I think you're being very generous, and I understand that. But it's hard to say across the board there's nothing good coming out. But blimey, any gold prospector would have gone bankrupt and gone home a long time ago if he was looking for gold in the New York Times list. It's fixed. We know that now. It's paid for. The real talents are shut down early on. Don't get a chance. And I could go on and on. But I do agree with you, and I'm very excited to hear you say that, because you're coming from a younger end of the spectrum than me. But I think the energy is here now, and it's just a matter of time before we get a cohesive structure that's strong enough to launch someone into the stratosphere, which I think is coming, despite the best efforts of our enemies. But good. Well, who knows? We will watch this space closely. You never know, you may be amongst them. TR, that's all I'm allowed to know about you, TR. So thank you very much.
It stands for Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Oh, that helps a lot. I'll Google you now. Anyway, it's been a pleasure having you on, and a pleasure reading your work. And we wish you a lot of luck in the next bouts of writing fever, and hope to have you back.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
It's a great pleasure. All the best.